we've got the new concept in design for the next three weeks is visual pathways. What the heck does this mean? What this means is that the way we arrange our shapes, our colors, lines or linear shapes in our paintings, we can actually subtly influence the way our viewers visually navigate through our painting. In other words, our viewer might enter the painting in the lower left and kind of zigzag around and end up in a particular place. Usually, we want to construct our visual pathways so that our viewer gets to the focal area. But sometimes we might want to get our viewer somewhere else within the painting. And this might sound really weird, but we actually have a fair amount of control over how our viewers navigate through the painting. So let's talk about that. And I really think this is a good thing to think about when you're designing a painting. So on this painting, what I would like to point out to you is we can enter the painting right here at the bottom. See the orange line? And then we can move around through all these shapes and end up right here. This is my focal area. This is where I want my viewer to be. So my plan when I designed this painting was to have all of the shapes that are describing physical objects either touching or connecting with each other or connecting via cast shadow shapes to provide this wonderful visual pathway to help my viewer. And I don't mean to imply that my viewer is helpless. I really don't. But to kind of help my viewer to move through the painting. Do y'all see that? It's really cool to do this. I think it improves the painting, and it may improve or enhance a viewer's experience of the painting if you help them a little bit. So here's another one. This was actually started as a plein air painting many, many years ago. I was in a little potting shed at a friend's house, and by the way, this is painted on gessoed paper, which is what I'm going to be using later this morning. And I just want to point out to you that this uh, trowel right here, see the way it's entering in the lower right? And it's like a giant pointer, a giant arrow that's getting the viewer up into here, which is where I want the viewer to look. When I made this painting, I will say, since this was a friend's house and I was very comfortable, I physically moved some of the objects around before I started painting. Ordinarily, I wouldn't touch anybody else's stuff, but this was a friend. I knew they wouldn't mind. So I actually picked up this trowel and moved it right there at that angle and designed it into the painting right there so it could do its job for me. Some of you might remember this demo. This was from a couple of years ago on Zoom. And in this one, I conceive of this painting as having a large white shape, which is a combination of the white house and the white laundry. My hope is that the viewer can enter here and move through the laundry and get right into the house. Guess what? Here's my focal area, everybody. Do you see that I've got my lightest light and my darkest dark right here? So my viewer will probably automatically be drawn to this area, but if my viewer needs any help, they can just travel through that white laundry and get into the focal area that way. This is another recent, fairly, was this from a class or a workshop? Now I can't remember. Look at the pathway. Sometimes a visual pathway is actually a physical pathway. So in this case, I've got a physical pathway cutting through the foreground. And I just want to tell you, when I was looking at my source photo, I did not see a pathway doing this. I didn't see a pathway at all through the foreground. I put it in there.
Hmm.
All right. That pathway, it kind of ends right here, doesn't it? I'm going to let my viewer take a little bit of a jump right here. And then they're going to head right through the pathway or, the split, the divide between these two mountains. This is the Grand Teton. Yeah, this is one of the Grand Teton Mountains, and they really do have these really deep V-shaped, dip, dips, valleys. And anyhow, my viewer can get right up here. This is meant to be my focal area, kind of right in here. But the zigzagging pathway helps to move my viewer there. And by the way, if you can get a pathway to kind of zigzag or move, especially in a landscape, that enhances the feeling of the depth in the scene that you're painting. Here's another one that this was a demo from a couple of years ago. And in this one, my focal area really was here. I don't have my darkest darks in my focal area though, do I? But I do have my darkest darks down here, and they're pointing right at my focal area. So there are all these tall, skinny pine trees, darkest darks in the painting, boom, pointing right here. So in this case, the pathway is almost like a bunch of small little arrows directing my viewer, saying, look here, look here, look here. Um, paint a scene like this. Here's a zigzagging pathway. All right, so we can start lower left, and we can zig and zag and zig and zag, and we end up at the focal area. In this case, the focal area is my darkest dark and my lightest lights. Yes, and the zigzagging shoreline back and forth helps to get my viewer through that rather large foreground, ending up in my focal area. And another one with a road, just follow up the road and then move into the focal area. A pathway. Physically, it is a pathway, and it frequently becomes a visual pathway. In this one, the stairs, I just want my viewer to visually climb the stairs and get to my focal area. In this one, the cast shadow is a visual pathway. Move through the shadow. You can even move through the boards in the wooden floor and get right to the focal area. So this is obviously an interior painting, not a big landscape, but you can still design a pathway in an interior painting. And this one I think is kind of fun. This was another demo I did, but in this one, I arranged all these fish in a specific way to help to accentuate the feeling of their motion, but also to keep my viewer moving around. I imagine some of you remember some of these paintings. This is one of my favorite paintings to illustrate the idea of a visual pathway. And in this case, it's a different visual pathway. I have made a, oops, wait a second. Let me get my drawing tool up. Here we go. If you follow, let's just start right here, okay? Upper right this time. And move across his red bandana and then down through the back of it. And then you have to take a little jump and you can get to the red ribbon that's holding his whistle. And then there's a bit of a jump through here. But basically, I've made a red, it's not a circle, obviously, but I've made a red linear accent around the guy's face and head. That's my focal area. The painting is about this guy blowing his whistle. Okay, do you see that? Okay, now I love to show my source photo for this painting. Here's the source photo. Do you see anything red in this source photo? Nada. Nothing. I put the red in because I wanted to create that accent, that visual pathway, to keep my viewer wandering around in this part of the painting. Something else. Do you see any green behind the guy in the photograph? Nada. Nothing. Look what I did in my painting. I put green back here as if, there's some trees or something. Why did I put green? All right, now we're getting into another aspect of designing, and that is using color contrast. Green is the complement of red. So to make this red bandana and the red of the whistle cord even redder, even more strong, I use the complement of red, green in the background. Once again, source photo, visual pathway. Hoo-ah. Abstracts, by the way, I think abstracts really, really need visual pathways because there's no physical imagery for a viewer to hold on to. Where the heck does a viewer look in an abstract painting? So if you can put some visual pathways into an abstract painting, it's going to be better. In this case, I've got visual pathways moving up and down through here, side to side through here. Where they meet is kind of my focal area. That may sound weird in an abstract, but yeah, where they meet is kind of this is the good stuff, the best stuff in the